Hello and welcome! I'm Snappy Dragon, you can call me V, and here we do stitchy business. In this video, I'm sewing an 18th century chemise dress to be worn at a 16th century Renaissance fair, and as a fantasy costume, and as a modern summer dress. Oh, and without doing a single fitting on the wearer. You might remember my friend Sarah from this video, where I made a silk ballet skirt for her birthday. You might also remember this video, where I took a walk around my neighborhood in my Regency dress to celebrate having 100 subscribers to this channel. Also, not even 3 months later, there are well over 1,000 of you. Yee, I'm so excited you're here. Anyways, Sarah watched that video and said to me, "Hey V, can you make me a dress like that?" And I said, maybe? But then she said, "Only, can you make the waist lower and the skirt fuller?" And my eyes lit up a little. "Sarah, you know that's an actual historical thing you're describing." "Great, I'll wear it to the Renaissance Festival next year." "Sarah, it's from 250 years after that." "I don't care." I'd wanted to sew a chemise dress for a while, but as I didn't need one myself, making one for a friend was perfect. So off I went to order many yards of floaty cotton lawn and some bright silk satin for the sash. Sarah lives in Minnesota and I'm in California, so fitting in person wasn't going to happen, but chemise dresses are fitted with drawstrings everywhere but the shoulders and are therefore adjustable. Before I start sewing, let's talk about the history of this dress. Most of us will recognize the chemise à la reine from this portrait of Marie Antoinette, which caused a scandal when it was exhibited. While she did popularize the style among the European upper classes, Noodle Stitch on Instagram researched its origins while sewing her chemise dress and turned up a rather different story. It originated in the Caribbean under the name robe à la Creole. Doing my best to sum up, this chemise dress seems to be a derivative of the fashions of free and enslaved Afro-Caribbean and indigenous Caribbean people, especially the fashions enslaved people wore on Sundays, the one day of the week they could dress as they chose. The term Creole appears to have meant white colonizers born in the Caribbean at that time, so even the name robe à la Creole might be crediting a Europeanized knockoff rather than those indigenous and Afro-Caribbean styles. However, Marie Antoinette's popularization of the dress led to a huge demand for fine, high-quality cottons, which of course led to further trafficking, exploitation, and mistreatment of enslaved black people in the cotton industry. If we follow the chemise dress through the French Revolution and into Regency-era styles, a story emerges of radical white women having ripped off black women's creations for their activism. Sound familiar? This is a powerful example of how racism has its grubby little hands on everything, including our pretty dresses. And it still does today. Let's be real, white supremacy also helped produce the cotton I just bought, because it is all over the modern textile industry. So what do? I don't have all the answers, I'm very much still learning. But for a start, let's not call it the chemise à la reine and stop there without context. I use that name for common recognition only. Tell the story and address its parallels today. Call for fashion companies to pay up for the orders they tried to cancel when the pandemic hit, and demand that garment workers, many of whom are women of color, be compensated properly. Support bills like California's SB 1399, which stop companies getting around minimum wage by paying by the piece. Look for ethically created fabrics to make our pretty dresses with. Please hit me with your info on this, by the way. And call out similar cases of appropriation in modern fashion, like how black women are discriminated against for wearing hairstyles like box braids and locks, but white people are applauded as trendsetters or edgy for the same styles, which physically don't work on their hair types. To engage with this topic more in the costuming community, go check out Latoya Toole's project, Be an Anti-Racist Costumer on Instagram. But don't stop there. White supremacy is everywhere, and we need to find it and fight against it everywhere. Got that? Great! On with the stitching. I was searching around the internet for chemise à la reine patterns, and I came across this diagram, not with the green scribbles on it, just the diagram. I like the idea of trying to draft something so simple as this myself better than the idea of buying a more structured pattern and making it more complicated. Also, this is just really pretty, because I had no idea where this diagram had come from. By looking up the name of the dress that's on the outside, this is actually copied out of the book The Cut of Women's Clothes by Nora Woe. I don't have that book, so I feel a little bit weird about using this pattern or cutting diagram that somebody had just scanned out of the book and put on the internet. I don't have a whole lot of experience scaling up book patterns. I printed it out, kind of like blowing it up to different sizes until I could get this measuring bar at the size to match up with like some coherent measurement. And I was able to print it out to get each of these blocks to measure 1/8 of an inch, which gave me a consistent scale to measure, say, this, and figure out that, say, that's 68.5 on the diagram. What I also have to help me adapt this from the measurements of the original garment that this cutting diagram was taken from is my friend's measurements. And I know from her underbust to her waist is 3.5. So I know that's how long that needs to be. I have shoulder measurements to do the strap and the sleeve. The rest of it is going to be completely fitted with drawstrings. So like I have her shoulder to hem measurement, but other than that, this is like an adjustable enough garment that I don't really need to do anything. I'm going to set my dress form to the measurements she gave me. So I'll have something to drape off of. And mostly it's just loose enough that as long as it fits in the shoulders and the length is right, we should be able to adjust to pretty much anything. Let's talk about measuring. This dress is very adjustable because of the drawstrings, but I still needed measurement for the shoulders and sleeves, and so I could set my dress form approximately right to drape everything. Sarah has dealt with some body image issues in the past, and seeing numbers on a tape measure can be really triggering for those. So in this situation, you can have someone else take and write down the measurements without showing them to the wearer. I asked for the usual bust, waist, underbust, and hip, but also shoulder to hem, neckline depth, the vertical distance between the neckline, underbust, and waist, back shoulder width, around the arm side, and then around the arm at the bicep and elbow. So I've taken my friend's measurements and I've adjusted a second copy of the pattern just with the numbers that I'm going to use for her. So her neckline is going to be a little bit higher. The distance between the underbust drawstring and the waist drawstring is going to be a little bit different. The sleeves are pretty much going to be the same. Some changes to the height of the arm side here, and adjusted the length for her height. I'm not yet sure how I'm going to cut this out. This is like a huge pattern piece, and drafting it's going to get interesting. I've also decided that if I can, I'm going to cut this back line on the fold because like I have enough continuous fabric. There is no reason for that to be multiple pieces if it doesn't have to be. I folded my black cotton lawn over itself by 68.5 inches plus seam allowance and began transferring the marks from my adjusted cutting diagram onto the fabric. I drew long lines across the entire piece for the underbust drawstring so I'd know where to place my casings, including a line that was literally just there for me to mark other lines off of. I plotted the scaled arm side measurements out, checking back in with the pattern, and connected the dots using my curve ruler. Then another long line for the waist drawstring, and yet another one for the hem with lots of room for leveling. I didn't feel like manipulating such a large piece of fabric, so I put my cutting mat under it and cut out with a rotary cutter on the floor. I followed a similar process for the sleeves, transferring the scaled measurements to a double layer of my fabric. I added on an extra 3 inches to the end of the sleeve for a ruffle, plus hem allowance. The sleeve also has 2 casings, one at the elbow and one midway down the upper arm. This was cut out in the same manner, and the marks transferred to the other sleeve piece. I cut about 1,000,000 yards of 1.5 wide strips to create all those casings. Rotary cutters make this so easy. Using a hat pin as a tape maker, I turned the strips into single fold binding tape. Don't leave your iron face down like this unless you really know your setup. The strip ends were overcast. And I did my best not to get eaten by the massive piece of cotton as I pinned the binding tape to the wrong side along my marks. Then I sewed casings. Forever. First one side, then the other, leaving enough room for a narrow tape or ribbon to pass through. The neckline also got a bound casing to draw in the gathers, but I only needed to fold and iron one edge of the binding strip. The unfolded edge was sewn right side to the neckline with a small zigzag stitch and a gap at center front. It could then be flipped over and top stitched down. I changed to contrasting bobbin thread and ran gathering stitches along the arm size. And then used yet another bobbin color for gathering stitches at the shoulder strap attachments. The back neckline was cut on the selvage, so all I had to do was turn that under and stitch it down to form another casing. With the body panel all prepared, I sewed it into a giant tube down the center front seam, making sure all the casings lined up. I finished the seam with a zigzag stitch to avoid fraying. Now I had to prepare the sleeves, which meant even more binding tape. Here's a super quick demo of how I use the hat pin, and a more detailed video in the card at the top right. Sewing on the casings. And finishing the bottom edge with a rolled hem foot. I really struggle with feeding fabric into these properly, but the finish is worth it. To fit the dress, I had to thread ribbon through at least 300 inches of casing. It took a while. I pinned the shoulder strap attachments into place on the dress form, which I'd set to approximately Sarah's measurements. Why yes, I am wearing the corset from my previous video. This is one of the ways I tested how it got on with my chronic pain, and if you want to know more about it, there's a card up there. Wrestling 140 inches of fabric down to a human waist measurement takes some doing, but at the end, I finally had something that resembled a dress. Back at the sewing machine, I ran gathering stitches all along the sleeve heads. Here's what the prepared sleeve panels look like, with the drawstring casings and gathering stitches all done. I used elastic in the sleeve casings, which didn't need to be quite as adjustable. I'm securing one end with a pin, threading it through the rest of the way, then pinning that end too. With that done, I could sew up the sleeve seam, catching the ends of the elastic to secure them. And zigzagging the raw edges after. Now the actually tricky part, sleeve setting. I pulled in the gathering stitches at the underarm until the arm size sat close to the body. And clipped the sleeve seam to the body where a side seam would be if it had one. The center of the sleeve was placed at the top of the shoulder and pinned to the dress form on either side. In better lighting, I began to pull in the gathering stitches on the sleeve head to the same size as the arm side. I arranged the gathers evenly across the top of the sleeve with no fullness at the underarm, and then cut out shoulder straps in the black lawn and a heavier black cotton for structure. These are simple rectangles of a length that seemed right on the dress form, and were sewn right sides together at what would be the neckline edge. I clipped the straps roughly into place, then pulled in the gathering stitches where they would attach to the body. I ran elastic through the back neckline casing, basting it in place at the ends. At this point, I remembered I had modern seam finishing techniques at my disposal. Instead of whatever complicated encasing of raw edges I'd been planning with the straps, I just clipped all the layers together and machine overcast the seam once sewn. I did baste all those seams because I didn't want to deal with the clips, but this was kind of a bad idea because it affected how the gathers sat. Pins would have been more sensible. I sewed the top of the sleeve head, the front and back shoulder strap attachments, and finally the underarm. The hard part was finished. As planned, I finished the shoulder seam with machine overcasting. I marked the correct length, then drew a line 3 inches below. This wide hem allowance would give a little extra structure to the bottom of the skirt when finished. I didn't think machine top stitching would look nice, so I ironed and pinned it for a machine blind hem instead. I have to reread my sewing machine's manual every time I blind hem, so I won't confuse you by trying to explain. Someone might be doing a tutorial for CocoVid. The top part of this curtain will make the perfect stiff interlining for the colorful silk sash. I'm tapering the ends to points so the sash will tie nicely. Then tearing 9-inch wide pieces of electric purple silk satin. Three pieces 44 inches long will make a nice fluffy bow. So I'm sewing the ends together and pressing the seams open before sewing the whole thing into a tube with right sides together. This was a critical error. Pressing the tube flat with the seam at the back made it impossible to finish the ends as I wanted to. Placing the seam at one edge would have been the correct choice. I zigzagged the cut edges of the interlining just to be safe and placed it in the sash, only stiffening the part that will go around the body. One more pressing. It makes a lovely bow, but the ends are still unfinished. I folded the sash in half and cut the ends at an angle, trying to make those cute double points. The plan was to turn the edges under and finish them by hand, but wow, did that not go well. Oh, bloody hell. The following footage contains too much foul language for even my audiences, and has therefore been cut from this video. I attempted to do it right by making a decorative hair tie out of the remaining silk and finishing the ends by machine, but since I made the same error about the seam placement, it didn't go a whole lot better. Sarah got an extra little present out of it though.
I always pack my dresses with painter's tape.
We can see the full versatility of the chemise dress, an 18th century dress that's somehow also perfect for frolicking through the forest, post-pandemic Renaissance fairs, and apparently the ballet studio? I hope you had fun, learned something, and feel inspired. Pop down in the comments and tell me about another unwhitewashing of a historical garment story. While you're at it, leave a like, subscribe if you haven't, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. You can also throw a few dollars of my fabric fund on Ko-fi to keep me stitching. I'll see you at CocoVid or in my next video. Happy sewing!